In this video, we are going to take the vectors that we created in a previous session and look at different ways that we can create the components to create the sign that you can see here. So let's go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. Okay, so from the project folder, I'm going to open Magic Bean Vector. Okay, we can see we've got our vectors there. Now before I go ahead and model anything, I just want to check my job setup, particularly the resolution. Okay, so I'm happy with a high resolution. We're going to work with Canadian maple appearance. So I'm going to press OK. So I'm going to go and tile my windows by using this icon here, so I can see my 2D view in the left and the 3D view in the right hand side. So the first thing that I'd like to create is our base shape. So if we go into the Modeling tab, okay, we can see in our component tree we have level 1 in here. Now what I'd like to do is just rename that level just to keep the project organised. I'm going to right mouse click, we're just going to rename that level. I'm going to call that level base. So anything that I create now is going to be entered into that level. Now we're going to create the main base shape first, and you'll remember when we created the vectors we did it in a way that we could create the model using a 2-rail sweep. So if we go into the 2-rail sweep form, and the first vector I'm going to select is this outer vector here. I'm going to hold down Shift and select this vector here, and these are going to represent our drive rails. So now we can say use selection, and that's now transformed those vectors into drive rails. So we're now ready to go and attach a cross section to those rails. So we're going to select this vector here. So this is the cross section that's going to sweep between those two rails around the part. I'm just going to attach it to this node here. Okay, and we can see by the lines here we've got a slight problem. What it's trying to do is it's trying to connect to each of the start points on each vector. So our outer vector start point is here, and for the inner vector the start point is over here. And what we want to do is we want both start points parallel to each other. So I'm just going to hover over this area here. I'm just going to right mouse click and say insert start point. And we can see, judging by these lines, this is more of what we're expecting. So if I just press apply just to take a look at that, and then in the 3D view I'm just going to zoom in just using the scroller of my mouse, and we can see that our corners aren't very flush and it looks as though it's twisting. So what's happening here is the cross section is starting at the same area on both vector rails, and as one vector is larger than the other one, this cross section is almost stretching around. So imagine it's like two cars going round a racetrack, and the car on the outside track is going to have to work a lot faster in order for it to get to stay in line with the car on the shorter track to get back to the original start point. So what we could do to help us is go in and add the cross section to each of these corners, but we know from when we created the vectors that both of these vectors have the same number of nodes. So what I could do is just right mouse click and say add to all rail nodes, and it's going to add that to each of those pairs of nodes, and then we'll press apply, and we can see now that we have nice mitered corners. Okay, put that back in the Z view there. So then we can use the option to fill centre of inner closed vector rails. That's just going to fill this area in between with material. So we'll select that. I'm going to rename that, call that base, press apply. We can see we've got our base shape there. So then we can go and close that form and create our next shape. Now we're still working with the overall base shape, but what I'd like to do now is create this recessed area in between these two vectors here. So I'm going to select the first vector, shift and select the second, and the tool we're going to use to create the shape for this recess is the create shape from vectors option. So I'm going to go in there. Now I'd like to give that an angled profile. We're going to give that an angle of 60 degrees. We're going to give that, we're going to make sure that we limit the height of that recess shape. So if I select that, and that's just going to limit it to a value that I'm going to put in here. We're going to limit that to 1/2 inch. We're going to call that one recess. press apply and we'll just see how that looks. Okay, you can see it's currently adding. Our combine mode here is adding on top of our base shape. What I'd like to do is subtract that inwards, so we're going to use the subtract option. We can see now we've got our recessed shape in there with the 60-degree angles that's limited to 1/2 inch. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So now we can go and create the dished shape in the centre there. So what I can do is just use this option to start a new component. And then I'm going to go and select my vector in here, and for this we're going to give that a rounded profile this time, so it's going to have rounded edges. We're going to alter the degree of that to 45 degrees. Again, we're going to go with limit to height at the same height, 1/2 inch. We'll set that to subtract as we want that to be a dish shape inside of our base shape, and we're going to call that dish. And we're going to press apply. We can see that's instantly created that there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's close that. And so now we've created all of the components that we need to use for our base shape. So I'm just going to minimize the base level. I'm going to hover over the base level, right mouse click, and I'm going to insert a new level, as I'd like to create a new element to my project. So I'm going to rename that level by right mouse clicking on there. I'm just going to call this one texture. Okay, so with that selected, it's bold, so that's telling me that's the active level. So anything that I create now is going to be added into this level here. So as I said, we want to make a texture. So we're going to create a texture that's going to sit within this recess here. So what we can do is create a texture from a bitmap. Okay, so we're going to use this option to create a component from selected bitmap. Now from the project folder, I'm going to bring in the coffee beans JPEG and press open. And we can see that that's been added to our component tree. Okay, so I'd like to fill this recessed area with our texture that we've got here. So I need to look at sizing this up. To help me, I can just select this circle here, and at the bottom in this area here, when I have something selected, it's going to tell me the dimensions of that part. So we can see that the width is 20, the height is 20. So when I select our bitmap, our texture here, I can go over to set size, and then I'm going to give that a height of 21, link XY. We'll press apply. We can see that that's really flooded that space there. So we'll close that. And with that selected, I'd like to align it to the centre of that circle. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select that circle. We're going to come in and say Align Selected Objects. And we want to align that to the centre of the last item in the selection. So the last item in the selection was that vector. So we'll select that, and we can see it's been centred to that circle. So we'll close that. And if we just take a look at that texture in the 3D view, we can see that there's quite a lot of roughness in there. And so most images that you will get will have quite a lot of noise in them, and this is purely just to do with the way that they're compressed down in order to make the file size smaller. So to help us reduce this effect, what we could do is just apply a smooth filter over all of that. So with that selected, let's go over to Apply Smoothing Filter. It's just going to do that at default of 50%. We can see already it's smoothed that down a lot. Let's just maximise that, see how that looks. Okay, so we've really smoothed that off and reduced the noise. So I'm okay with that. So we'll just OK that and start thinking about how to crop that down to that recess shape there. So in order for me to do that, I need to select the component and a vector or vectors that I'd like to crop the component to. So I'm going to select our component first. I'm going to carefully select the outer circle of our recess shape, which is this one here. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select that, and then come in, select the inner circle, and hold down Shift, and select that one also. And then I can come over to this option here in the modelling tools and clear area of selected component outside selected vectors. We can see that that's removed everything outside of those vectors that I had selected. So if we just take a look at the part in the 3D view and see how the texture is interacting with the rest of the components, we can see we're getting some strange results. Now ideally I'd like to have the texture blending within that recess there. So if we take a look at our component tree, we can see that our coffee beans is sat in the texture level. Now the combine mode of our texture level is set to add, so that's adding on top of everything within the base level. Okay, so that's essentially what it's doing in the 3D view. It's adding on top of the base level. So in order for me to get the texture to blend in within that recess, I need to look at altering the combine mode of that level and changing that to merge. So if I right mouse click and go to the combine mode and set that to merge, it should blend in like so. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Just one last thing, I'd just like to check the height of our texture component. So I can access the component properties just by double clicking on that component there. Okay, we can see the current shape height of the part. I just want to reduce that down to 0.2. I'm going to press spacebar to enter that in. We can see that's done that there for us. So let's just minimize that level. We're just going to switch both of these off just by pressing the checkbox there. And now I'd like to start creating the components for our leaves. So I'm going to right mouse click over the texture level, and I'm going to use the option to insert a new level because I'm making a new element here. So I'm going to right mouse click, rename that level. I'm going to call that leaves. Okay, so that's the active level. It's bold, so we know anything that we create now is going to be entered within this level here. So let's just take a look down the z-axis in the 3D view. So the first component I'd like to create is the berry of our leaves. So I'm going to select that vector. I'm going to go into create shape from vectors. Then in here we're going to go with the round profile because it's a natural shape, so it's best to go with the round profile here. We're going to give that an angle of 90 degrees. We're going to scale the height of this, so the highest point is going to be a height that I'm going to specify in here, which is 1/4 of an inch. We're going to call that dome. I'm going to set that to merge, then press apply, and then we can see that there in the 3D view. So let's just close down that form. As the next component we're going to create, the leaf, we're going to create this using the 2-rail sweep. Okay, so you can see we've got our 2 vectors here, and this is the cross section that we're going to use to sweep between those 2 spans. So if we go into the 2-rail sweep form, okay, we're going to select our vectors for our drive rails. So I'm going to select that one first, hold down shift, select this vector here, then we're going to say use selection. And if we take a look in the 2D view, we can see the direction of our rails. So our red rail, we have arrows pointing up, and our green rail has arrows pointing down. Now in order for this to work, we must have those rails flowing in the same direction, so that the cross section is going to sweep between each one in the same direction. So I'm just going to hover over any one of these and right mouse click and just say reverse rail, and then we can select our cross section. Okay, I'm just going to press apply just to see how that looks so far. If we take a look at that in the 3D view, you can see it's not too bad, but what we could do is use this option to scale cross sections with width, and what that will do, it will create a more natural looking part where the software will alter the height of the cross section in proportion to the distance between the 2 rails. So if I select that and press apply, we can see that that's created more of a natural looking shape, and it looks a lot nicer. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to scale this to an exact height of 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so the highest point of that cross section is going to be 1/4 of an inch. We'll set that to merge, we'll call that leaf, press apply, and then we can close that down. And so now what we can do is select our leaf component. We just want to create a mirrored copy, so it's going to sit below the dome here. And to help me, what I could do is select this guideline that we created in the vector session. So I'm going to hold down shift, select that vector. We're going to come over to transform objects, mirror selected objects. And what we're going to do is uncheck flip job about center, we'd like to create a mirrored copy, and we want to flip that about the line. So you can see that there. Let's just put that back in the Z view. We'll close that, and at this stage what we could do is just look at grouping all of those. So with that leaf selected, let's hold down Shift, select the dome so that they're all highlighted now. We'll right mouse click and then let's group them. And then let's just select the other levels and switch those on. So I'm going to select the texture level, and then we'll put the base level on. Okay, so let's take a look at that in the 3D view. So again, we can see we've got a funny interaction with where the leaf is sitting within that recess. And just like the texture, what we'd like to do is set that to merge, so it's merging with the components that are below it. So if we go over to the component tree, right mouse click, go to the combine mode, set that to merge, we can see that that's now merging through. It's not through entirely. If we just take a look closer, we can see that it's not completely proud of that texture, so we just need to go in and alter that. So what I could do in the 3D view, select it to put it into transform mode, and then select the properties handle, which is this square here, and that's going to bring up the properties form. And here I can look at adding in a base height. So I'm just going to give a very small base height of 0.2, press spacebar to enter that in, and we can see that it's added the base height there, and it's just lifted that up proud of the texture. So I'll close that, put that in Z, and so now I'm happy with that component. I can look at creating the mirrored copy on the other side. So if that's selected, let's go over to mirror selected objects. We want to flip about job center. We'd also like to create a mirror copy, so we're going to flip horizontal. That's going to create our copy on the other side. So let's close that, and then we'll just minimize that level there. And now we're ready to create the components that are going to represent our coffee beans in the center. So again, like we've done before, we're going to insert a new level as we're working with a new element, just to help me keep organized. So I'm going to right mouse click and say insert a new level, right mouse click, rename that level. We're going to call that level coffee beans, and then that level is the active level, so again anything that I create now is going to be inserted within that level. And so let's go and create the component for this bean that's going to be sat in the background. So with that selected, we're going to go and create shape from vectors. We're going to go with a round profile, 90 degrees, and for this we're going to scale that to an exact height of 0.2, so the highest point of that component is going to be at 0.2. We'll set that to merge. We're going to call that bean, press apply. We can see that's been added in the 3D view there. Okay, so we'll go and start a new component to create the front bean here. So we'll say start new component. I'm going to select the vector. Again, we're going to go the round profile, 90 degrees. This time we're just going to make that a little bit bigger. So we're going to scale that to an exact height of 1/4 of an inch. And we'll press apply just to see how that looks. Okay, you can see in the 3D view that it's blending in with the bean in the back. And what we want to do is give it the illusion that this bean is sat proud or in front of the bean in the background. So to help me create that look, I could look at adding a tilt. So it's just going to lift an area that I select. So I'm going to use the tilt option, and we're going to say set. Okay, so what I can do now is set my start point for the tilt. So I'm just going to click here. This is the area that we'd like to keep the same. And then I'm going to drag out this cursor, and I'm just going to click to the area and the direction that I'd like to apply the tilt. So I'm just going to click here. We can see it's lifted that there. So if we take a look at that, you can see it's added a large wedge at a default of 10 degrees. So I can just go in there and just minimize that. Let's try around 4. Okay, so that's not too bad, and we can see from the front view that that's sat proud of the bean in the background. So let's name that component front bean, press apply, then we'll go ahead and start a new component. So the next component I'd like to create is a crease within our front bean. So I'm going to select this vector here. Okay, we're going to give that an angled profile of 45 degrees. And then make that no limit, and we're going to set that to subtract, so it's going to subtract into the front bean, and we'll just rename that and call that crease. Let's press apply, see how that looks. Okay, so it's not too bad, I'm happy with that. So then we can go ahead and close that. So let's just maximize the 3D view and take a look at that. Okay, so it's not too bad. If we take a look at our beans, we can see that the back bean is almost disappearing into the background. So what I'd like to do is apply an overall tilt to all three of these components. So to do that, I'm going to select all of those. I'm going to select one, hold down shift to select all of those. Then I'm going to right mouse click and group them. Then I'm going to select them in the 3D view, and then we're going to go to the properties handle at the bottom, and I'd like to apply a tilt. Okay, so I'm going to set my tilt, so I'm going to select the set option. We can see we need to put in our first point, which is going to be below our coffee beans. And I'm going to select my second point, which is going to be at the top, and then we can go and set the angle of that. So we just take a look at that. I'm just going to move my form over here. And then if we take a look in the 3D view, we can see how that looks at 1.6. That's not too bad, that's completely lifted. So I'm actually fairly happy with that. So I'll just close down that form, put that back in Z, and then the last thing I'd like to do is just give this an overall smooth over. So with those selected, let's go to the smooth filter. Okay, it's going to warn me that we need to bake that before we edit it. That's okay, I'm happy to do that, so we can press OK. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in. Okay, so it's done that at default 50%, and that's a little bit too much, so I'm just going to reduce that down. Okay, so around 25% is okay. I'm happy with that, so we'll just OK that. And so at this stage, it's a good idea for me to go and just check the height of those beans. Remember, we set our dish to be 1/2 inch, so we don't want that coming higher than 1/2 inch. So let's just go into the properties. Okay, you can see that is over the 1/2 inch, so I'm just going to alter the shape height of that to be 0.48. Space to enter that in, and so then now that should sit below the 1/2 inch. So if we close that, and we can just check that by going to scale Z height of model. Okay, so you can see the current height is 1/2 inch, so nothing's coming over the top of our base shape there. So we can OK that. Let's just put that back in Z, and then we'll tile our windows. Okay, so just go to tile windows. I'm just going to minimise the coffee beans level. And now we're ready to create our last component, which is the fresh coffee text. So let's go and insert a new level. So right mouse click, and then we'll go and insert a new level. I'm just going to rename that level, call that text. Okay, so it's the active level. Let's select our fresh text, shift and select the coffee text. We're going to go and create shape from vectors. And for this, we're going to use an angled profile. I'm just going to up the angle of that to 75 degrees. I'm going to limit the height of that to 0.4. I'm going to rename that text. Let's just press apply, see how that looks. Okay, so that's okay. So I'm going to close that. And if we take a look at the 3D view, we can see the texture is transmitting through that text there, and that's because our text level is set to add to the levels below it. So what we need to do, like we did before, is look at setting the combine mode of that level to merge so that it's blending in there. So if we right mouse click, go to the combine mode, we're going to set that to merge. Okay, so that's good, I'm happy with that. One final thing I'd like to do is just to apply a small smooth filter over the text. So I'm going to select the text, I'm going to go into the smooth filter. Okay, so again, it does that at default 50%. I think it's a little bit too much, so I'm just going to reduce that down to around 30. Happy with that, let's press OK. We'll just maximise the 3D view. So let's just minimise that level. We'll just do one last check on the overall height of that composite model. So we'll go into scale Z height of model, and there we can see that the current height is 0.5, maximum is also 0.5, so we know that there's nothing going over the 1/2 inch that we've got our base shape set to. So we can OK that. And that really finishes this tutorial. So by using the vectors that we created in the previous session, we've managed to create this sign using a combination of the Create Shape tool, the 2-rail sweep, and the creating a component from a bitmap. So at this stage it's a good idea to go ahead and save the file. So let's go to File, Save As, we're going to call that Magic Bean Model, and then you can access that from the project folder.